A millionaire survives a terrible accident, but what the poor recycler did next left him in tears. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Under the relentless downpour that drowned the streets of downtown Seattle, the city seemed to blur into a watercolor of headlights and shadows. Water rushed through the gutters like rivers out of control, and thunder rolled low across the black sky like a warning. Somewhere amid that chaos, a woman in a soaked hoodie pushed a rickety cart filled with recyclables, her fingers trembling from cold and exhaustion. Her name was Maya Rivera, and survival had become her daily routine. Not living, not thriving, just enduring. She glanced at the time on her cracked phone. 9:38 p.m. She whispered a prayer under her breath and picked up the pace. Her son Leo, just 7 years old, was waiting at home, hungry and likely asleep without dinner. She hadn't made enough today. Maybe she could trade the aluminum cans for a can of soup at the corner store, if it was still open. Turning the corner of 4th Avenue, Maya stopped cold. A screech shattered the night, then the unmistakable sound of twisting metal, violent, loud, final. Her head whipped toward the source just in time to see a sleek black sports car careen into a utility pole, metal folding like paper on impact. The windshield shattered. Sparks burst from the engine. Then silence. A deadly kind of silence. Maya didn't think. She let go of her cart and ran. The car hissed as steam and fuel leaked onto the wet pavement. She could barely make out the man inside, slumped over the wheel, blood trailing from his forehead. A stranger. Rich by the look of the vehicle. Powerful. Someone who probably had never once thought about someone like her. None of it mattered now. She pulled at the driver's side door. It wouldn't budge. Her heart pounded in her ears. "Hey, can you hear me?" she yelled, banging the window. No response. Her hands found a jagged brick near the curb, and she smashed it against the corner of the window. Once. Twice. It cracked. She climbed half into the vehicle, grabbing at the man's collar, unfastening the seatbelt with shaking fingers. He groaned. Alive, but fading. The smell of gasoline grew stronger. She screamed from the depth of her soul, and with a strength born of fear, pulled his limp body out of the car, dragged him 5 feet, 10. Her shoes slipped on the wet ground. Then, an explosion. The car burst into flames behind them, illuminating the street like daylight for one haunting moment. Maya threw herself over him to shield his body as debris rained down. Sirens wailed in the distance. She didn't wait. As the first responders approached, Maya vanished into the alley, her breath ragged, her hands covered in soot and blood. She didn't stay for the applause that would never come. She didn't need it. All she needed was to get home to Leo. At the same time, lying broken on the sidewalk, the man she had just saved, James Whitmore, billionaire tech mogul, name splashed across the headlines weekly, lay unconscious, unaware that his entire world had just changed. Not because he'd almost died, but because a woman he had never met, someone the world wouldn't even notice, had just risked everything to save him. And she didn't even stay for a thank you. The morning sunlight crept cautiously over the Seattle skyline, gilding the rain-washed buildings in gold, as if trying to erase the memory of the night before. In a private suite at St. Augustine Medical Center, James Whitmore stirred. His eyelids fluttered open to the sterile white ceiling and the soft beeping of machines nearby. Pain throbbed behind his eyes and in his ribs. For a moment, his brain was too foggy, to make sense of anything. A nurse noticed the change and rushed to his side. "Mr. Whitmore, you're awake," she said gently. "You were in a car accident, but you're safe now." He blinked slowly, trying to piece it all together. The last thing he remembered clearly was the blinding rain, the slick roads, and then chaos. A flash of light, a sensation of being pulled, a face, a woman's face. She had been yelling, her voice panicked but strong. He remembered dark curls plastered to her cheeks, a trembling hand reaching for him through shattered glass, but he didn't know who she was. And then everything had gone black. A few hours later, James's assistant, Olivia Grant, arrived, visibly shaken but composed as always. "James," she said, taking his hand lightly, "thank God you're okay." "Barely," he muttered, voice hoarse. "What happened?" "You crashed your car into a pole. Witnesses say a woman pulled you out before the car exploded. She left before anyone could get her name." James frowned, sitting up slightly despite the pain. "She saved me, and no one knows who she is?" "Not yet. We're trying. There's some traffic cam footage being reviewed by the police, but she disappeared before the ambulance arrived." James closed his eyes, frustration rising. In his world, where everything came with a cost, a contract, or a condition, this kind of selfless act was inconceivable. Who risked their life for someone like him? A man known more for ruthless boardroom takeovers than kind words, and then just vanished? "I want to find her," he said, voice suddenly firm. "No matter what it takes." Olivia hesitated. "James, she might not want to be found." "I don't care," he snapped, then softened. "I owe her more than my life. She didn't just pull me out of a car. She gave me a second chance." Meanwhile, across the city, in a cramped two-room apartment in the shadow of Capitol Hill, Maya sat on the edge of her son's bed. Leo, still asleep, had curled himself into a ball, clutching his threadbare stuffed dinosaur. She brushed the hair from his forehead and whispered a silent prayer of thanks that she'd made it home. But exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. Her knees ached from the weight of dragging a man twice her size. Her arms were sore. Her clothes from last night were still damp. Yet she had told no one. Not her neighbors, not the woman at the daycare, not even Leo. What was there to tell anyway? That she had stumbled into someone else's nightmare and barely made it out herself? She had checked the news, of course. The headlines were plastered across every morning broadcast. Billionaire CEO James Whitmore, in critical condition after late-night crash. But none of them mentioned her. No one knew. And somehow, that felt right. She wasn't looking for recognition. She had too many battles of her own. Rent was due in 3 days. Leo's asthma medication was running low. She had no job, no safety net, just the cart, the recyclables, and the tiny hope that maybe next week would be better. But that morning, something shifted. As Maya watched Leo wake up and smile at her, she realized something had awakened inside her too. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. That man, whoever he was alive because of her. In a world that rarely looked her way, she had made a difference. That thought, fragile as it was, wrapped itself around her like a shield. Across town, James stared out the hospital window, replaying the fragments of that night like a scratched record. He couldn't see her clearly in his memory, but he could still feel her hands dragging him from the wreckage, hear her breathless voice screaming at him to stay awake. He didn't know her name, but he knew this much. He was going to find the woman who saved him. even if she didn't want to be found. 3 days had passed since the crash, and James Whitmore sat in the passenger seat of his security vehicle, his body still stiff, a cane resting against the side of his leg. He wasn't used to feeling powerless, but the bruised ribs and fractured ankle served as stubborn reminders that he had been on the edge, and someone had pulled him back. The doctors told him he was lucky to be alive. James didn't believe in luck. He believed in action. And today, he was taking the first step in repaying the debt that had begun to haunt him more than the pain in his bones. He had reviewed the traffic camera footage over and over again. Most of it was useless. Rain blurred the lenses, but there was one frame, just one, where her face appeared, soaked to the bone, hair tangled in the storm, dragging him from the wreckage with a look of grim determination. Olivia had printed the image, and James kept it folded in his pocket. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She was pushing a cart, James said, tapping his cane against the floor. She wasn't a passerby. That route was hers. She probably collects recycling there often. Olivia nodded, already scanning her tablet. I mapped the blocks near the intersection. Based on pedestrian patterns and pickup zones, there's a high likelihood she lives within a 10-block radius. James looked out the tinted window at the gray streets of Capitol Hill, where people bustled, oblivious. Then we walk. Walk? Olivia blinked. James, you can't even... I said we walk, he interrupted gently. We're not going to find her behind a desk. They canvassed the streets for hours, speaking to local vendors, community centers, soup kitchens. Some recognized the woman in the blurry photo. She's around here a lot, one grocer said. Comes early. Quiet type. Has a kid, I think. Another remembered her smile. Always says thank you, even when folks ignore her. They didn't know her name, but they knew her heart. That told James everything he needed to know. Meanwhile, Maya's world had shifted in smaller, quieter ways. She hadn't told anyone about the accident, but she found herself staring at the same street corner each morning, wondering if the man had survived. She had seen the news reports. James Whitmore, the Whitmore Holdings mogul, a man who moved money and markets. She had saved someone who probably had never heard the word struggle in his entire life. She told herself that it didn't matter. She had done the right thing. That was enough. But at night, after Leo had fallen asleep, she would stand by the window and stare at the city lights, wondering if he remembered her. Back in the city, Olivia finally caught a break. A volunteer at a shelter on Broadway had taken the photo to a weekly food pantry. One of the workers recognized Maya and gave a name, just a first name. Maya. And a detail. She sometimes stopped by the community job center on 12th. The next morning, James went in person. He sat in the small, dim office, dressed not as a millionaire CEO, but in simple clothes. No watch, no entourage. When Maya stepped in that afternoon, looking for job listings, her tired eyes scanned the room and locked with his. He stood slowly, uncertain. Maya. She froze. Her grip on the paper she held tightened. Yes, I think... James paused, watching recognition bloom in her expression. You saved my life. The room disappeared in that moment. She stared at him, heart pounding. You're the man from the crash. James nodded, stepping closer. I've been looking for you. Maya took a step back, unsure. Why? Because I owe you everything. She shook her head. You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done. No, James replied softly. You did what almost no one would have done. Silence settled between them. The air felt heavy with unsaid things. Maya looked down at her worn shoes, unsure of what to say. I don't want to intrude on your life, James continued, but I want to help. Not as a transaction, not because I feel obligated, but because you changed something in me. And I can't ignore that. Maya studied him. He looked nothing like the powerful man on the news. He looked real, vulnerable, and for the first time since that night, she allowed herself to speak the truth she'd been holding inside. I was just trying to get home to my son. James's expression softened. You have a child? She nodded. Leo. He's 5. James smiled. Then it's not just my life you saved. It's his future too. Because I'm going to make sure you both never have to struggle like that again. Maya's eyes filled with disbelief. Why would you do that? James looked at her, his voice steady. Because sometimes the universe gives us a second chance. And this time, I'm not wasting mine. For the next few days, Maya tried to carry on, as if nothing had changed. But something undeniably had. Every time she walked the same streets, every time she passed the intersection where she had dragged James from that burning wreckage, a weight she hadn't realized she carried began to lift, only to be replaced by the unease of a new, unfamiliar possibility. Her world had always been structured around survival, around routine. Now, someone like James Whitmore, a man with wealth, influence, and an inexplicable sincerity, had stepped into that world offering something she never dared hope for, support without condition. James didn't contact her again immediately after their meeting. Instead, he sent a letter, handwritten, on crisp stationery, delivered quietly to the front desk of the community center. It was brief, respectful, and humble. Maya, no pressure, no expectations. But if you're ever willing, I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee. James. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. She kept the note in her apron pocket for 2 days before responding. She wasn't sure why she said yes. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the tired weight of shouldering everything alone for so long. Or maybe it was the memory of how his eyes softened when she spoke about Leo. Either way, she found herself sitting across from James at a small, quiet cafe on the edge of Capitol Hill. Nervous, but trying not to show it. James, for his part, looked out of place. Not because of his clothes. He had kept it simple, a gray sweater and jeans, but because he kept glancing at Maya like he wasn't sure if this was real. He opened the conversation gently, asking about her work, her life, and most of all, about Leo. He's everything to me, Maya said, warming as she spoke about her son. He's curious and loud and relentless, always asking why, always dancing, even when there's no music. James smiled. He sounds like the kind of kid who'll change the world. Maya looked at him, a small part of her skeptical. Why are you doing this, really? James leaned forward. Because you reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. I've spent years building things, companies, deals, images, but the night of the accident, when I saw you, it was like I woke up. You didn't know who I was, and you didn't care. You acted because it was the right thing to do. I realized I've been surrounded by people who want something from me. You're the first person in years who just gave. Maya looked down at her cup, stirring her coffee slowly. I didn't do it for thanks. I know. That's why it meant everything. She didn't know what to say to that. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about his recovery, and he told her in detail the pain, the therapy, the fear he hadn't admitted to anyone else. And she listened, really listened, because for all his wealth and power, he seemed like a man trying to piece something back together, just like her. After that day, they saw each other more often, always in casual ways. A brief walk through the park, while Leo ran ahead with a toy plane, a sandwich shared on a bench, when she was between recycling pickups. He never made grand gestures, never flaunted his money. And Maya began to feel something she hadn't allowed herself in years: ease. Then, one afternoon, James did something that shook her. He showed up at her apartment building, holding a manila folder. Maya was instantly guarded. "What is this?" "Just hear me out," he said, stepping back to give her space. "I know this might seem like too much, but I wanted to offer you something. Something you can accept or refuse. No strings." Inside the folder was an offer letter. A position at one of his companies. Administrative assistant. Part-time to start. Full training provided, with daycare assistance. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "I know. But I saw your potential. And I also saw the world you're navigating. This isn't charity, Maya. This is an open door." Her pride rose, sharp and defensive. "Why me?" James looked at her, his tone calm. "Because you're smart, capable, and the kind of person I would trust to run my business one day if you wanted to. And because Leo deserves to see his mother step into something greater." Maya closed the folder. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. That night, as she tucked Leo into bed, he asked the question that stopped her cold. "Mommy, is Mr. James your friend?" She looked at her son, his sleepy eyes full of innocence, and nodded slowly. "Maybe he is." And for the first time in a long while, that didn't scare her. The following Monday morning, Maya stood in front of the towering glass building of Whitmore & Co., her heart thudding in her chest. She wasn't used to this. Offices, elevators, glass doors that opened with key cards. Her life had been all about collecting recyclables, negotiating with scrapyard owners, and navigating alleyways. But James had made her an offer that stirred something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The idea that maybe she could be more than just someone who survived. Maybe she could build something better, not only for herself, but for Leo. She smoothed her secondhand blouse, clutched the folder of documents she'd been asked to bring, and stepped through the doors. The receptionist greeted her kindly, already expecting her. "Maya Sanchez? You're meeting with Mr. Lyle on the 3rd floor. He'll walk you through orientation." Maya nodded, muttered a thank you, and entered the elevator. The ride up was silent but heavy with her thoughts. Could she really do this? What if she didn't belong here? But then she remembered Leo's wide eyes when she told him she might have a new job, one that would let her spend evenings with him instead of working late into the night. That hope, that belief, became her anchor. On the 3rd floor, Mr. Lyle, a soft-spoken HR manager, welcomed her warmly. He walked her through the basics. Her role would involve sorting and managing internal documents, scheduling appointments, assisting one of the junior directors. No prior office experience required. The company would train her, and James had already arranged a childcare stipend. As the hours passed, Maya realized that while the work was new, it wasn't beyond her. In fact, the rhythm of it reminded her of what she was already good at: organizing, multitasking, staying focused. Her instincts to adapt, honed from years on the street, kicked in naturally. What surprised her most wasn't how challenging the job was, but how quickly she began to feel like she could actually do it. At lunchtime, she sat alone in the break room, unsure if she should make the first move. She hadn't been around many people in structured work environments, but soon, a woman with curly red hair and bright eyes sat across from her with a sandwich and a welcoming smile. "Hey, you're new, right? I'm Andrea. I work in logistics." Maya smiled, a bit cautious. "Yeah, first day. I'm Maya." "Nice to meet you, Maya. If you need help navigating this maze or figuring out which coffee machine doesn't taste like despair, I've got you." They both laughed, and Maya felt a little of the tension leave her body. This didn't feel like a trap. It felt real. Maybe not entirely safe yet, but not threatening either. As the week unfolded, James kept his distance. He didn't check in or hover. He didn't try to manage her or make her feel indebted. And that, in some odd way, deepened her trust in him. He wasn't using the job to control her. He'd truly just opened a door and stepped aside. But that didn't mean he wasn't watching from afar. On Friday afternoon, as Maya was finishing her work, a delivery person appeared with a small brown box tied with twine. No return address, just a small note on top. For Leo. From someone who knows how hard you're trying. Inside was a wooden puzzle shaped like a city map, with pieces that clicked together to form neighborhoods and parks. One of those high-end educational toys she could never afford. Maya's breath caught. She didn't need to guess where it came from. That evening, when Leo opened the box, his face lit up. "Mommy, this is like the city we see when we ride the bus." Maya sat on the floor beside him, watching him twist and turn the pieces. "Yeah, it is," she whispered, emotion catching in her throat. James hadn't just given her a job. He had found a way to connect with Leo, too, without even being there. It wasn't just thoughtful. It was deeply, quietly respectful. Later that night, after Leo was asleep, and the tiny apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge, Maya sat by the window, the city lights reflecting in her tired eyes. For years, she had shut the world out. She didn't trust people, especially not men in suits with fortunes and promises. But James wasn't forcing anything. He wasn't showing up uninvited. He was giving her space, letting her choose. And now, for the first time in years, she was choosing something new. The next morning, she pulled out a sheet of paper and started to write a letter. "James, thank you for believing I could belong in a place like this, even when I didn't believe it myself. I'm still figuring things out, but I wanted you to know I'm not afraid of the change anymore. Maya." She didn't send it, not yet, but she folded it carefully and placed it in her drawer, knowing that one day she might. It was a gray Wednesday morning when James Whitmore finally returned to his office after nearly a month away. The last remnants of the accident still lingered: an ache in his shoulder, a scar above his eyebrow. But physically, he was mostly recovered. What hadn't healed yet, however, was the gnawing feeling inside him. Something had shifted in that crash, something profound. And it wasn't just about the wreckage or the near-death experience. It was about her, Maya. James had kept his distance since she joined the company, Not because he wasn't tempted to reach out, to see how she was adjusting, to talk to her like they had that first night, but because he knew boundaries mattered, especially with someone like Maya, who had fought her entire life for her independence. She needed space. He could give her that. He had to. Still, the moment he stepped into the building again, he found himself instinctively scanning the floor. Would she be at her desk? Would their eyes meet? Would she recognize him, standing in the place she now worked? He walked through the lobby, every employee acknowledging him with formal greetings. James nodded, his expression neutral, but inside he was anything but composed. On the second floor, just as he turned a corner, he saw her. She was seated at a desk, typing something into a computer, her face a mask of focus. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore a modest navy sweater and black slacks. Nothing extravagant, but she carried herself with a quiet grace that made her stand out even in a room full of polished professionals. He stopped, momentarily stunned by the sheer reality of her being there in his world. As if sensing his gaze, Maya glanced up. Their eyes locked. Time seemed to pause. For a moment, her expression was unreadable. Then came the flicker of recognition. It wasn't surprise, but something heavier. She quickly looked back at her screen, pretending to resume her work. But James saw her shoulders tense. He turned and entered the elevator without saying a word. Upstairs, he stood at the window of his office overlooking the city, but all he could see was the look on her face. She had known. She recognized him. She just hadn't known until that moment that the man she'd saved from a burning car was the same man who owned the very company she now worked for. Lucas entered quietly. "She saw you," he said, not needing to specify who. "Do you want me to speak to her?" James shook his head. "No. Let her come to me if she wants to. This can't feel like a trap." "She probably has questions," Lucas added. "So do I," James replied. Meanwhile, Maya's mind was a storm. She had suspected something for a while. Rumors she'd heard, quiet nods in meetings when his name was mentioned. The way her hiring had felt, intentional. But seeing him there, with his tailored suit and composed demeanor, confirmed everything. He was the man in the wreck, the one she had pulled from the car with her bare hands, trembling from the heat and the smell of gasoline. And now, he was her boss. Or had been all along. Why hadn't he told her? The more she thought about it, the more conflicted she felt. Gratitude, yes, but also unease. Had this been some kind of elaborate repayment? Was her job truly hers? Or had it been a gift she hadn't asked for? That evening, after putting Leo to bed, Maya sat by the kitchen window, staring out at the flickering city lights. Her chest felt heavy, her mind unsettled. She had worked so hard for dignity, for something of her own, and now it felt like the ground under her had shifted again. She needed answers. The next morning, Maya approached Lucas at the end of a team briefing. "I need to speak with Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice calm but steady. "Not about work, about everything else." Lucas didn't flinch. "I'll let him know." When she entered James's office later that day, it felt like stepping into another world. The space was minimalist, sleek but not cold. There were books along the walls, real books, not for display. A plant in the corner, a framed photograph of a coastal trail in Big Sur. And behind the desk, James stood when she walked in. "Maya, he said gently. I was wondering when you'd come. She closed the door behind her, but didn't sit. Why? She asked, without preamble. Why didn't you just tell me it was you? James walked around the desk, his tone sincere. Because I didn't want to take away your agency. You didn't owe me anything. You still don't. But this job, all of it, was it just charity? No, he said firmly. It was an opportunity. One I offered because I saw something in you that night. The way you ran into danger to help someone you didn't know. That kind of strength, it's rare. You saved my life, Maya. I wanted to make sure yours had room to grow. Maya looked away, conflicted. It just feels like maybe I didn't earn any of this. You did, James replied. Every day you show up, every time you choose to keep going, despite everything stacked against you, you've earned more than this job. You've earned a future. I just gave you a door. You walked through it. The room fell silent. The only sound was the distant hum of the city below. Maya finally spoke, her voice quieter now. I didn't want to need anyone. I was proud of surviving. You still should be, James said. But surviving isn't all there is. You deserve more than survival. She met his eyes then, and something in her began to soften. Not completely. Not yet. But it was a start. I just needed to hear it, she whispered. James nodded. And I'll keep saying it, as long as you need. When she left his office, the weight on her shoulders had lessened, even if just slightly. The truth had come out. It didn't fix everything. But it was a beginning, and for the first time, Maya began to wonder. Not if she could trust James, but if maybe she could trust the future again. In the days that followed Maya's confrontation with James, a subtle shift began to take place between them. There was no dramatic declaration or sudden closeness, but rather a quiet understanding that slowly deepened. Maya returned to her tasks with a clearer mind, more grounded in her purpose. But beneath her focus, there was an undercurrent of curiosity she could no longer suppress. James Whitmore wasn't just the man she saved. He was becoming someone whose presence had begun to mean something more. For his part, James honored her space, just as he promised. But every so often, when their paths crossed in the hallway or during project updates, their eyes would meet, and a silent acknowledgement passed between them. It wasn't about the accident anymore. It was something more human, more personal. Two lives that had collided in chaos, now circling around each other in calm. On a rainy Friday afternoon, the company held a small appreciation event for the operations team, where Maya had been assigned since her arrival. It was nothing grand, just coffee, snacks, and some music in the common area. But for Maya, it was one of the few moments in a long time where she felt seen, not as someone struggling to survive, but as someone valued. James made a brief appearance, walking in quietly and blending into the background at first, but the moment Maya saw him, her breath caught slightly. He wasn't dressed like a CEO today. He wore a simple sweater and dark jeans, looking more like a friend than a billionaire. When he approached her near the refreshment table, his smile was easy. I heard the team hit all their goals this quarter. That's no small feat. Maya returned the smile. It's been a good team. I just try to keep up. No, James said, his voice softening. You help set the pace. The compliment landed somewhere deeper than she expected. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, with sincerity, not flattery. As they stood in that moment, surrounded by light conversation and laughter. James leaned in just enough to be heard over the music. Would you ever want to grab coffee sometime? Not work-related. Maya hesitated, her heart thudding in her chest. She wasn't used to invitations like this, not from someone like him, and certainly not after all the walls she had spent years building. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her this wasn't a line. This was him, taking a risk too. Okay, she said quietly. One coffee. That Sunday, they met at a small cafe tucked between art galleries in the Soho district. It was James's idea, but Maya appreciated the understated charm of the place. Warm lighting, soft jazz, and the scent of roasted beans in the air. They talked about nothing and everything. Maya shared stories about Leo, how he loved painting on the walls, how he asked deep questions about the stars and the moon. James laughed, visibly touched by her devotion. In turn, James opened up about the loneliness that came with his status, about how the accident had made him question everything. By the time they left the cafe, rain had started to fall again, not in torrents, but in a soft rhythmic drizzle. They walked slowly, not speaking much, just enjoying the simplicity of the moment. At the corner of the block, Maya paused. I don't usually do this, she admitted. Do what? Let people in. James looked at her with that same steady gaze. You're not the only one who's learning how. The next few weeks unfolded gently. They didn't rush into anything, didn't define their connection too quickly. Instead, they built something steady. Coffee breaks, lunch chats, and the occasional shared cab when the weather turned cold. But change never comes without challenge. One afternoon, as Maya returned to her desk, she overheard two coworkers whispering in the hallway. I'm telling you, she's getting special treatment. Have you seen how often he talks to her? She was just a recycler. Now she's getting FaceTime with the CEO. Please. Maya froze, the words cutting deeper than she expected. She had worked so hard to prove she belonged, to stand on her own merit. Now it felt like all her effort was being reduced to gossip and assumptions. She considered confronting them, but instead, she quietly walked away, choosing not to feed the fire. But it lingered in her chest, the doubt clawing at her sense of pride. That evening, as she sat at the park with Leo, watching him chase pigeons with a laugh only a child could make, Maya felt the ache return. What was she doing? Could she really afford this fragile closeness with James when the world seemed ready to tear it down the moment it started? Later that night, she received a text from James. I hope your day went okay. Thinking about our next coffee. No pressure. Just us. She stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Today was rough. Not because of you, just noise. I'll explain next time. Whenever you're ready, he replied. As Maya put her phone down, a thought occurred to her, something she hadn't let herself believe until now. Maybe, for once, someone wasn't trying to fix her. Maybe he just wanted to walk beside her. And that, more than anything, terrified her. Because it meant she had something real to lose, but it also meant, for the first time in her life, she had something worth risking her heart for. The following Monday, Maya arrived at the office with a quiet storm of thoughts swirling inside her. She moved through the morning with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, trying to shake the lingering weight of the rumors she had overheard. The idea that people believed her position, or worse, her character, was tied to her connection with James unsettled her deeply. She had spent years building her dignity brick by brick, and now it felt like it could all crumble under whispered assumptions. James noticed the difference in her right away. He saw it in the way she barely looked up during their project review, how her laughter seemed forced when someone made a joke, and most of all, in the way she avoided his gaze. Later that afternoon, he sent a message through the internal chat system. "Can we talk for a few minutes? Just you and me." She stared at the message, unsure whether to ignore it or say no. But something inside her, something braver than her fear, responded simply, "Okay." In his office, the atmosphere was quiet. James stood by the window when she walked in, his silhouette outlined by the gray light of an overcast sky. "Thanks for coming," he said, turning around. Maya crossed her arms, trying to stay grounded. "You wanted to talk?" James motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing. "I know something's bothering you," he began carefully. "Is it about the project? Or is it something else?" She hesitated, then let out a soft sigh, her voice low and firm. "People are talking, James, about me, about you, about why I'm even here." He looked down for a moment, then met her eyes again. "I'm sorry. I should have expected that, and I should have done more to prevent it." "It's not your responsibility to manage gossip," she said quickly, then paused. "But it's hard. I've worked so hard to get here. And now it feels like none of that matters, because people think I'm just someone you're helping out of guilt." James took a step closer, the space between them tightening. "Maya, I admire you. And yes, what you did for me changed everything. But nothing I've done since then has been out of pity or guilt. You earned your place here. The team sees your dedication. I see it. But not everyone sees what you see," she whispered. He nodded, understanding the conflict in her heart. "Then let me be clear. I won't hide the fact that I respect you, and if anyone in this company crosses the line, they'll answer for it. But I'll also give you space, whatever you need." There was a long silence before Maya finally sat down, exhaling deeply. "I just don't want my story to be reduced to someone else's narrative. I've lived too long letting people define me. And I don't want to be one of those people," James replied gently. Their eyes locked, and for a brief second, the chaos faded. In the days that followed, James kept his promise. He didn't hover. Instead, he worked behind the scenes to subtly reinforce Maya's role in the company, highlighting her contributions in meetings, assigning her to visible projects, and ensuring she was recognized publicly for her efforts. It wasn't favoritism. It was fairness. And soon, people began to notice Maya not for her connection to the CEO, but for her results. Outside of work, their interactions remained gentle. One evening, Maya found herself walking through Central Park with James after a late meeting. They didn't plan it. It just happened. One of those rare moments that felt unforced and natural. The air was crisp, the trees lit softly by the golden spill of old-fashioned lampposts. Leo was with a neighbor that night, so Maya allowed herself a rare pause from her motherly instincts. "I used to come here when I had nowhere else to go," she said quietly, watching a couple walk past holding hands. "Leo would fall asleep in the stroller, and I'd just sit on the bench, wondering how I'd make it to the end of the week." James's expression softened. "And now?" "Now," she said with a slight smile, "I'm still trying to figure things out, but I'm not as scared as I used to be." They stopped near a fountain where the water trickled softly into the basin. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded napkin with scribbled ink on it. "I found this in my car glove compartment a few weeks ago," he said. "It was from the night of the accident. The paramedics had used it to note down some info. Your name was on it. That's how I found you." She took the napkin, surprised to see her own name written hastily in blue ink. Something about it, the rawness of the moment it captured, made her chest tighten. "I never thought you'd try to find me," she said. "I didn't try," James said softly. "I needed to." They stood there in silence, the city pulsing gently around them. Maya folded the napkin and handed it back, but James closed her hand around it. "Keep it," he said. "It's part of your story. And mine." Later that night, back at her apartment, Maya placed the napkin inside the journal she kept tucked beneath her bed, one where she wrote notes to herself on the nights she couldn't sleep. As she closed the cover, she realized something. For the first time in a long time, her story didn't feel like survival. It felt like the beginning of something real. She wasn't just someone who had saved a life. She was someone learning, little by little, to live her own again. It was a gray Thursday afternoon when Maya received the envelope that would unravel the fragile piece she had begun to build. She was at her desk, sorting through client proposals, when the receptionist delivered it. A thick, official-looking packet addressed to her by name. She opened it without much thought, but the moment she read the first line, her heart dropped. It was from a law firm. A man claiming to be Leo's biological father was seeking legal visitation rights. The past she had worked so hard to bury had come clawing back without warning. Maya sat frozen, her hands trembling slightly. For years, she'd raised Leo on her own, without support, without interference. The man who had abandoned her when she was at her most vulnerable had returned, not out of love, not out of remorse, but with a demand, a claim. By the time her shift ended, Maya's composure had shattered. She sat alone on a park bench near the office, holding the envelope tightly in her hands, as if doing so could somehow control the chaos it had unleashed. When James called her that evening, just to check in, he knew something was wrong before she even spoke. "Can we meet?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They met at a quiet cafe a few blocks from the company. James arrived first, sitting near the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. When Maya walked in, she looked exhausted. Her usual resilience had dulled. She slid into the booth and placed the envelope between them. He read it, his face tightening with each line. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm but filled with fire. "He has no right." "No," Maya said, her voice raw. "But the law doesn't always care about that." James leaned forward. "We'll fight this. I'll get you the best legal team, whatever it takes." She shook her head slowly. "I appreciate it, but I need to do this myself. Leo is my son. I raised him. I can't have someone else step in and make it seem like I'm not enough." James paused, visibly restraining the urge to argue. "Then let me stand behind you, Maya. Not to take over, just to support." Her eyes softened. She wanted to let him help. She wanted to fall into the strength he offered. But old instincts fought back. The years of learning to survive alone, the scars left by abandonment. "I'll think about it," she whispered. Over the following days, Maya buried herself in legal research. She met with local family attorneys, combed through old hospital records, and collected evidence to build her case. She barely slept. James noticed the toll it was taking, but respected her distance, offering help through Lucas, who gently passed along resources and contacts. Meanwhile, James quietly began his own inquiry. He had Lucas look into the man's background and discovered a history of financial instability and run-ins with the law. Nothing violent, but enough to show a pattern of irresponsibility. When Maya received the news from Lucas, it gave her a flicker of hope. Still, nothing could quiet the gnawing fear that a courtroom might strip her of the only security she and Leo had ever known. The day of the court hearing arrived with a sky full of heavy clouds, echoing Maya's own anxiety. She dressed in her simplest, most formal outfit and clutched Leo's hand as she dropped him off at school, forcing a smile so he wouldn't sense the storm ahead. At the courthouse, James waited for her. "I didn't tell you I'd be here," she said, startled. "I didn't need permission to care," he replied, gently but firmly. During the hearing, Maya sat with her lawyer, her back straight, her face composed. The opposing counsel tried to paint a picture of redemption, a man who wanted a second chance to be a father. But Maya's lawyer countered with a clear timeline of abandonment, absence, and neglect. Then it was Maya's turn to speak. She stood, looked directly at the judge, and spoke with a voice steadier than she thought possible. "I raised my son alone from the moment I knew I was pregnant. I begged his father to stay. He left. Not once did he call, or send help, or ask about our well-being. And now, when my son has finally found stability, when he is thriving, this man wants to come back, not for Leo, but for control." The courtroom was silent when she finished. In the end, the judge sided with her. Visitation was denied, and custody remained solely in her hands. When Maya stepped out of the courthouse, the rain had stopped. She looked up at the clearing sky as James walked toward her. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied softly. "We did." For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to lean into him, her head resting on his shoulder. And there, on the courthouse steps, Maya felt something she had fought against for too long: the safety of being held without fear. The weeks following the court victory unfolded like a quiet sunrise, slow, golden, and full of warmth Maya had never allowed herself to imagine. With the looming threat of Leo's father finally behind her, she found herself walking through each day a little lighter. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile came easier, and James, he remained by her side, not with grand gestures, but with steady, undeniable presence. One Saturday morning, James showed up at her apartment with a small backpack slung over one shoulder and an idea dancing in his eyes. "How do you feel about a short getaway?" he asked, standing at her door with that half grin she was starting to look forward to. Maya blinked. "A getaway?" "Nothing fancy. Just a weekend out of the city. Somewhere quiet. You, me, and Leo, if he's up for it." She hesitated. The idea of leaving behind the noise and routine felt tempting, but also vulnerable. Still, when Leo emerged from his room with bright eyes and heard the word trip, his excitement sealed the decision. The next day, they drove north toward Lake Placid, a peaceful town nestled in the Adirondack Mountains. The winding roads were lined with fiery autumn trees, and the crisp air was a welcome change from the dense city atmosphere. They stayed in a small lakeside cabin, simple, cozy, and filled with the kind of silence that made space for thoughts that had long gone unheard. Leo ran through the woods, collecting leaves and skipping stones along the water. Maya sat on the porch, watching him, while James quietly brought her a blanket and coffee. It wasn't just kindness, it was attentiveness, the kind of care that asked for nothing in return. "You're quiet," James said, sitting beside her, his voice low, thoughtful. Maya nodded. "I'm just taking it all in. I forgot what peace felt like." James looked out at the lake. "You built this peace, Maya. You've earned every second of it." She turned toward him, eyes full of something she hadn't dared to name yet. "Maybe. But I didn't build it alone." That evening, after Leo had fallen asleep, curled in a blanket near the fireplace, Maya and James stepped outside. The stars stretched endlessly above them, more visible than she'd ever seen in the city. "I used to be afraid of letting people in," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every time I tried, I got hurt. I learned to stop hoping." James didn't interrupt. He just listened. "But with you," she continued, "it's not like the past. You never tried to fix me. You just stood beside me while I figured things out." He stepped closer, reaching gently for her hand. "Because you never needed fixing. You just needed someone who saw the whole of you and stayed." Maya's breath hitched. For so long, she had guarded her heart with armor built from pain and solitude. But in that moment, she felt something shift, like the final piece of the wall falling away. "James," she said, barely able to finish his name before emotion caught in her throat. He cupped her face with both hands, eyes locked on hers. "I love you, Maya. I've known it for a while. I love you for your strength, your honesty, and the way you love your son. I don't need anything from you, just the chance to be in your life." Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. "I love you too," she whispered, "and I'm not afraid anymore." They kissed under the stars, not like the movies, not dramatic or rehearsed, but slow, tender, and deeply real. Back in the city, life began to feel less like survival and more like living. Maya and Leo moved into a slightly bigger apartment, closer to Leo's school and James's office. James didn't push, didn't rush. They grew into each other's lives like two roots intertwining beneath the surface, steady and unshakable. At the company, Maya continued her work with growing confidence. Colleagues who once overlooked her began seeking her out for advice. Even the executive team noticed her insight and suggested she consider a management training program. It was a far cry from the woman who once stood under the rain with a cart of recyclables, wondering if life would ever offer more. But Maya hadn't forgotten. She never would. She volunteered part-time at a community center, helping single parents navigate support systems, build resumes, and believe in their own worth. Each story reminded her of her own journey and of the power of a single moment, a single choice to change everything. One crisp spring afternoon, James and Maya sat with Leo at a small cafe near Central Park. Leo, now thriving and full of his usual curiosity, was busy drawing a picture. When he held it up proudly, both adults smiled. It was a house, a sun, and three stick figures, labeled Mom, James, and me. Underneath it, in childlike scrawl, were the words, "My family." Maya reached over, brushing Leo's hair back with a laugh that trembled with joy. James watched them both, his heart full. "You've given him a life full of love," he said. "We've given it to him," Maya corrected, taking his hand. Because in the end, it wasn't the accident that changed their lives. It was the choices that followed. the choice to be kind, the choice to help, the choice to stay. And those choices built something stronger than fate ever could: a family. In the heart of a stormy night, two strangers crossed paths in a way neither could have predicted. One, a wealthy man with the world at his fingertips, and the other, a single mother barely scraping by, pushing a cart of recyclables through the flooded streets. What began as a moment of chaos, a car crash, a desperate rescue, unfolded into a story that quietly, powerfully rewrote both their lives. Maya Rivera was never one to expect miracles. Life had taught her that dreams often come with a price, and hope, though beautiful, was dangerous when survival was the only thing you knew. She spent her days collecting recyclables to feed her son, Leo, and her nights assuring him that better days would come, even when she didn't believe it herself. But when she pulled James Whitman, an unconscious stranger, from a burning car, she unknowingly set into motion a chain of events that would test everything she thought she knew about fate, love, and worth. James was a man of status, success, and solitude. He had the money, the reputation, the empire, but no one waiting at home, no one to remind him of who he was outside the boardroom. When he awoke in the hospital and learned that a woman, unknown, unrecognized, and uncelebrated, had saved his life and vanished, something in him shifted. For the first time in years, he felt a longing not for control or success, but for connection, for truth, for meaning. What followed was not a grand romantic gesture or a sudden whirlwind change. It was slower, quieter, more human. James used his resources to find Maya, not to pay her back in cash or headlines, but to give her the opportunity she never had. A job offer she didn't know came from him, a chance to rebuild her life with dignity. And when their paths crossed again in the halls of his company, it wasn't gratitude or guilt that brought them together, but shared vulnerability. Maya didn't fall in love with James because he was wealthy. She hesitated, resisted, questioned, because life had shown her how fleeting comfort could be. But James was patient. He stood by her not as a savior, but as someone willing to earn her trust every single day. And in return, Maya offered him something no money could buy: honesty, courage, and a window into a life where love was measured not in gifts, but in presence. Throughout the story, Maya fought for her son, Leo, with everything she had. When his absent father returned, threatening to take away the only thing that gave her life meaning, she didn't crumble. She stood tall. And when James offered his help, she didn't say yes out of desperation. She said yes out of strength, knowing that accepting support was not weakness, but wisdom. Together, they faced courtroom battles, internal fears, whispered gossip, and the unrelenting weight of the past. But brick by brick, they built a new future. One where Maya no longer had to fight alone, where Leo could thrive in safety, and where James rediscovered what it meant to be truly alive. Their love story was never about riches. It was about resilience, about learning to trust again after years of being let down, about allowing someone into your world, not because they can fix it, but because they choose to stand in it with you. And in the end, it was Leo, a child born of hardship and raised in love, who symbolized everything Maya and James had overcome. His innocent drawings, his laughter, his unfiltered questions, like, "Are you going to be my daddy?" reminded them that sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest voices. Their wedding wasn't a fairy tale with castles and chandeliers. It was a celebration of perseverance, of two souls who met by accident and chose, again and again, to stay. The lesson from this story is clear and universal. No act of kindness is ever wasted. Maya didn't save James for recognition. She saved him because it was the right thing to do. And in return, she was given not only opportunity, but also a partner, a friend, and eventually, a family. In a world that often feels disconnected, their story teaches us that connection can come from the most unexpected places, that the walls we build to protect ourselves can also keep out the very things we need, and that vulnerability, when met with compassion, is the birthplace of something truly transformative. So, how do we apply this lesson today? We start by seeing each other, by slowing down in our own storms to notice who might be struggling beside us. We use what we have, whether it's money, time, or simply kindness, to uplift, not to rescue. And we remind ourselves that no one is beyond redemption, and no life is too broken to be rebuilt. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you pause and reflect, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us bring more powerful, emotional, and meaningful stories like this to life. We believe in the power of storytelling to change hearts, and with your help, we'll keep doing just that. Subscribe now and stay with us, because the next story may just change your life.